actual company made up very quickly, because the first echelon of the New Zealand forces had left. They then called for a railway construction company, because they needed it for the Sigfield line. And that went to England. That was the 10th railway construction. That went to England, and they actually, a detachment of that company was sent to France, but because of the advance of the Germans, it was realized that, Dunkirk was going to happen, and it was necessary to withdraw the unit back to England. We then were in a situation where they had a company which they didn't know what to do with. And but just at that time, they had decided, just at that time, Italy came into the war. So it was called for, the railways here called for 3 companies: a further construction company, which they called the 13th, and a 16th and 17th operating companies. That is the actual drivers, firemen, guards, and station operating staff. These were formed, and it was decided that they would go to Egypt because they were having a problem with the Egyptian railways. So the 10th company, which was in England, was sent back to join the other companies in Egypt. The first job we were given was shadowing the Egyptian crews, because Egypt was not at war. And what they would do is, if a fighter came over, they would desert the train in the middle of the desert and wait until the danger had passed. It was our job then to take the train on, because it was necessary to get the war equipment to the front line as soon as possible. So that is what we had. They called us for the sake of not upsetting the Egyptian crews. They called us learners.
What you said?
We did that for some considerable time, and then it was decided that the advances were being made against Graciana in the Western Desert. So they decided to build a line from Mersa matruh right through. Well, they intended to go further than Tobruk, but that's as far as they ever built it. So they had difficulties there, in as much as they had mismatched materials from all over the world in the construction. They also had another problem. At Mersa matruh, there is an escarpment which is around about 700 feet in elevation. So it was decided, the English engineers, the Egyptian air railway engineers, said it was impossible to build a line over this escarpment. However, a Lieutenant Mackay of the New Zealand Division surveys found a suitable route, and they built it. And not only did the construction, the 10th and 13th construction, built the line, and they continued building the line right through to south of Tobruk. And and we actually operated from Alexandria, or we shadowed crews from Alexandria to matruh, and then we actually physically took over the train from Simla, which was the area we moved off the Egyptian line, right through to Tobruk. Now this was very important to the 8th Army because it was early in the war. Transport was at a minimum because the factories had not geared up to manufacturing suitable transport. Also, the roads were very poor. So railway was an essential part of the 8th Army. Matter of fact, Erwin Rommel just made a statement in his memoirs that the railways was the greatest advantage that the 8th Army had. And also, after Alamein, Bernard Montgomery stated, "It's now over to the railways and Rommel," which meant that as long as we got the supplies through, it was to their advantage to the 8th Army.
Yep. So, what specific unit were you in? You mentioned 3 of them. Which one were you with?
I was in the 17th Railway Operating. I was actually a fireman on the locomotives.
A fireman on what, you said?
I was the actual, for one of the crew on the locomotives.
Okay.
And when Rommel actually took over from the Italians, he evidently decided that we were one of the lifelines to the 8th Army. So he actually vented his fury on us. In the first week of him taking over, we actually lost 24 engines. That's how often his Luftwaffe attacked us. And when they attacked us, and they came out of usually it was around about the 109-mile peg, and they would come out of the sun. We had because of the noise in the cab of the locomotive, we could not hear them coming. And it was a case of close the regulator, apply the brakes, and the brakes on the Egyptian trains, by the way, was only on the engine and on the brake van at the rear. There was no Westinghouse system on the Egyptian railways. And therefore, we just simply had to leap out of the cab. And sometimes that would be anything up to 6 to 14 feet onto, in some cases, sandy surface, but in most cases, rocky, and it was not so easy on the body. We actually, in the period of the 3 years when he was there, we had 36 casualties and quite a number of injuries.
Okay, and how many men were in the unit? You said there were 36 casualties. Out of how many?
Each unit consisted of 275 men, which was actually covered the whole of the system. That was the locomotive, that was the operating system. The guards and the operating staff were shunting and all that. The workshop system, that is repairing the locomotives, although we used the Egyptian repair works as often as possible. What we'd do is that an engine was thoroughly pierced by bullets, and the engine would go into the workshops, and each of the bullet holes, the tubes, were plugged with a screw plug. And this was allowed the engine to be returned to service fairly quickly.
Okay. So after a while, they must have had a lot of screw plugs in them then.
Had a what?
They must have had a lot of screw plugs, repairs after a amount of time.
Oh yes, the engines were actually Scania, English Scanias, and they were not the same as the British Scania engine, because the British Scania engine was made of hardened steel. The engines that were supplied to us were mild steel, simply because of the hardened steel was not available, or not in quantities, and that was why the bullets would pass through the tubes very, very simply. Fortunately, they didn't use an explosive bullet, which could have been very serious for us.
And were you personally attacked on numerous occasions while you were in the engine?
Number of times.
Okay. So it would always be, you said, they would come out of the sun and you wouldn't hear them?
No, they always attacked out of the sun. Now, in the initial stages, we had very little protection. The only protection they had was they would have a box car, they would remove the roof of it, and there was usually two Bren guns used. One was right there immediately behind the engine. The other one was in front of the guard van at the rear of each train. As you can realize, Bren guns were not exactly a very good protection against attacking aircraft. After the battle with the Italians, where we took thousands of prisoners, we acquired the Italian breeder Akiak guns.
Okay.
These were installed on flat tops at the rear and front, and these were quite effective against the German and Italian attacking aircraft. It was towards the end of the war, they decided to use barrage balloons. The barrage balloon was attached to just behind the engine and in front of the van at the rear. This would stop the aircraft from attacking the full length of the train, and also it made it very difficult for getting up the engine or the van, which was the main object of their attack.
So the principle of the barrage balloon is that there's the cable going between the train and the balloon, so that prevents the airplane from flying too close.
There was actually steel wires hanging from the balloon, and those also had explosive charges on the wires, so that an aircraft had to fly above the balloon, or if they tried to come in, they're liable to get their wings cut off or be blown up by the explosives.
Okay. So it wasn't just a simple balloon. It actually had it was a well-designed system. How high were the balloons above the train?
Around about 500 feet.
Okay. And could the airplane simply shoot down the balloons?
We never had any occasion where they shot the balloon down.
Okay. And could you maybe explain in details, one or two times you might remember, when you were attacked, the specifics of one attack in particular that you might remember?
I didn't quite catch that.
Could you maybe explain one attack in particular that you remember? One that stands out in your memory?
Well, I would say that the attacks, which were several I had, were you wouldn't divide them out. They were similar. They would come in with their machine guns blazing, and it was a case of you've got a locomotive travelling at the scene between, say, 20 to 30 miles an hour. The aircraft attacked, so you've got to stop the locomotive, so naturally you cut off the steam, apply the brakes, and leap. Now the locomotive would probably travel some distance before it stopped, because the brakes were applied, but it would still had been, the weight of the load behind it was pushing it forward. So usually you had to walk quite a distance after the attack to get on, to carry on with the locomotive if they hadn't damaged it.
Okay, and would you jump on whichever side the airplane was not coming from?
You always jumped from the side away from the attacking aircraft. As a matter of fact, one driver, which we had, didn't obey that order. He actually jumped out the side of the driver, which happened to be on the side of the attacking aircraft, and he actually copped a shell in the guts. He virtually almost fell off the engine in two parts. Of course, died immediately.
Okay. And was the engine usually too damaged to function after the attacks, usually? Or would you usually manage to make it advance?
It just depended. If the attacking aircraft had gone for the crew and left the boiler alone, well, it was possible for the aircraft to the train to be carried on. It just depended where the bullets had hit the steam engine.
Okay. And you mentioned 36 casualties. When you say casualties, do you mean killed or do you mean killed and wounded?
36 killed.
So I suspect...
The wounding, I couldn't say how many were wounded, but you've got to remember that not only were there some wounded by bullets, but also when they leapt, they quite often, there was damage to the body by rocks or the surface they landed on.
Yeah, okay. And all these men would now be buried...
There was one, Bert Padley, was one driver who actually received a military medal. He was attacked on the Stuka bank, that is halfway, it's about halfway between Mersa and Tobruk. And he was attacked there. And what happened was that it was a train carrying British troops. And they had, in this case, they had an Egyptian crew. They were shadowing them. The Egyptian driver, the Egyptian fireman were killed. The New Zealand fireman was killed. And Bert Padley, there were actually 52 bullet holes around about where he stood, and numerous cannon shell holes. Now, he was very badly wounded, but he was not unconscious. And a British lieutenant from the troops that they were carrying managed to climb over the top of the coal bunker and down into the cab. And Bert Padley, although he was badly wounded, was able to tell him how to control the engine to bring it to a satisfactory standstill. He then became unconscious, and I don't think he knew anything till he got to hospital.
Okay. And so when you were in the train, you wouldn't know you were under attack until bullets would hit the train, pretty much.
That was the case usually.
Okay.
Sometimes you would see an aircraft, and you would visually see an aircraft, and you would be a little more prepared to evacuate the engine.
Okay. And all these casualties, I suspect, are still buried in Egypt today, at Alamein or in the other cemeteries.
How many men?
No, I said the casualties that occurred, they would still be buried in Egypt.
Yeah, they're mainly in Libya.
In Libya, okay.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, I don't know whether you saw the news where during this problems in Libya with Gaddafi, that a large number of headstones were knocked about and smashed.
Yes, I saw that.
You saw that?
Yes.
Well, some of those were New Zealanders, and some of my own friends.
Okay.
Because quite a number of our casualties were buried in Libya.
And you mentioned one person who was killed when he jumped out the wrong side. Do you remember his name by any chance?
Bob Yates. He was a sergeant, Sergeant Bob Yates, WWII.
Okay. Whenever somebody tells me about a specific story, I try to get the name as well, so that it's possible to research the person afterwards and all that. That's why I'm asking you. It's always good to get the specific unit, date, name, and all that if it's possible.
Well, he was from the 17th Railway Operating Company. He was Sergeant Bob Yates, YEATTS.
And in one train...
His fireman... what about it? I tried to think of his name. Anyway, his fireman actually took over the engine and drove it to the nearest station before he was relieved. And he actually picked up the body and put it onto the engine at his feet when he drove the engine on. He was never mentioned in dispatches or decorated in any form.
Okay. And how many crew members of New Zealanders were in each train?
There would be two, the driver and the fireman on the front of the train, and there would be one who was the guard or control of the train at the rear.
So only 3 people?
That one?
Only 3 men?
Yes, only 3 men on the train.
And who was manning the Bren guns then?
Who
Who was manning the Bren guns, the machine guns?
They were either English or South African.
Okay. And what was your usual itinerary? To the front, then back to Alexandria, then back to the front?
No, I can't quite hear you there.
What was your normal itinerary with the train? Tobruk, Alexandria?
We were running around 7 trains per day. And we were actually delivering between 2,000 to 4,000 tons of equipment to the front line.
And where were you picking up the equipment? In Alexandria, in Cairo?
Well, they would be the Egyptian crews would bring them a certain amount of the way on their own. It would generally be handled by either the 16th or 17th Company for the next section, and then be taken on by the 16th or 17th further.
So you only took over once it got near the front lines?
We were actually, the 17th Company, that's the company I was with, was working at the time of Alamein. We were working from Amaria, which is about 20 miles behind the front line, to actually Amaria Station.
Okay.
We were actually delivering goods almost, they were under the range of the German guns, and never at any stage were we actually fired upon whilst at Amaria, strangely enough, at El Alamein. I don't know why. They must have known that we were moving stuff into there. But we would run a train into the El Alamein station, whilst all the ASC trucks would line up on both sides of the train. By the time they'd emptied, we'd turn the engine to the other end, and the train and trucks vanished within a quarter of an hour to 20 minutes. Okay. That's how quickly the load was dispersed.
And why were you selected for this unit? Were you involved with trains as a civilian before the war?
I don't know whether it would be luck or bad luck, but we happened to be the company handling that section from Amaria to El Adam.
Yeah, but my question was, why were you selected to be in this train company?
Why was I selected?
Yes.
Well, I was actually I was in the Locomotive division in New Zealand. I was actually, what happened was, as far as I was concerned, the Minister of Railways actually sent me a telegram, a personal telegram. Now, I wasn't the only one that they were sent to. It was sent to all eligible railway men to join this unit. And we were volunteers at that stage.
Okay.
I left with what was known as the third echelon.
And
that was in the very early stages.
And at what date did you join the unit?
Now I'd have to just check that. Just
approximately. I mean, what year? 1939 or 40?
1940.
Okay.
Matter of fact, I received the telegram from the Ministry of I was under 21 because 21 was the age, but I was only 20 at the time. I thought about it, and I actually hopped on my motorbike and I rode to the recruiting office, signed on the dotted line. And the chap there said to me, right, in 5 days you will be in Hopa military camp, and you must expect to sail within 14 days. That's how urgent the unit was required. It was a special unit. We were actually in an unusual position because when we went overseas, we were not sent as with the division, not with the New Zealand division. We were non-divisional, and we arrived in Egypt. When we arrived in Egypt, we found ourselves under British command. Now, about a group of us were sent to Greece at the time of the Greece campaign, and one of the 10th Company was taken capture by the Germans. That was the first time that General Freiberg, who was in charge of the New Zealand division, knew that a company of ours was over there.
Okay.
There was evidently a hell of a row between General Freiberg and the British government, the New Zealand Labour government at that stage. And because Freiberg immediately said, I am in charge of all New Zealand forces. So evidently they came to an arrangement between the government and General Freiberg that we would come under him for rations, uniform, discipline, and Anyway, for all else, we were still under GHQ Middle East, and therefore controlled by British command.
Okay, and you said that you sailed after just a few days. So did you have the regular military training?
Now you said... Say that again?
Did you go through regular military training?
We had practically no training before we left. Now what happened was that at the time, the 14 days that I mentioned, it didn't eventuate because there was a raider in the Tasman and Dunkirk was happening. And that delayed us. So instead of us leaving on the Aotea as we were supposed to and going via Canada, we actually were delayed and sent with the third New Zealand echelon to Egypt.
Okay. The Army, or did you have a specific uniform and badge for?
Matter of fact, we were issued with the new battle dress. That is the dress that all New Zealand forces had after. See, the first echelon left, and they were still in the uniform of the First World War.
Okay.
And the second echelon left, and they were dressed in the uniform of the First World War. But by the time we left on the third echelon, we were dressed in the new battle dress uniforms.
And did the railroad companies have a special badge or something to identify them? An insignia?
No, we just had the New Zealand firm.
Okay.
with NZ and a third on either side.
And you mentioned before that the Germans never shelled you with artillery. Only the airplanes.
No, never. We were hit by bombs. They bombed us on numerous occasions. They machine gunned and bombed us, but we were never actually hit by artillery.
Okay. And
the only time that we were fired on by anything like artillery was when I was just before the big retreat. Now that was just before Alamein. We were actually at El Adam, which is about 6 miles south of Tobruk. We were doing a job there, and it was just before the Battle of WWII. And one of the tank officers came down and was talking to us, and he said, "What are you chaps doing here? It was going to be a tank battle here in no time." And that was the Battle of WWII. And just when before he left us, our dispatch rider arrived with instructions that we were to make our way back to our own unit as quickly as possible, as our unit was moving back at 10 a.m. Now, we left there, and we're on our way back from El Adam to Port Capuzzo. We were fired on by German firing columns. Now, I don't know what weapons they used there, but they were fairly heavy weapons. But we got back to our own unit about 10 minutes before they were due to leave. Otherwise, we'd have been in the bag. But we then left, and there seemed to be, this was the Great Retreat, and there seemed to be no control whatsoever. Everybody seemed to be going the wrong way. Aircraft were flying the wrong way. Transport was going the wrong way. And there seemed to be very little control. We managed to lift all our equipment, our rolling stock, and we didn't leave it. The only engine, we left one engine behind, and to render it useless to the Germans, we put an explosive in the firebox and blew it to hell.
Okay.
There was the first stop we had was at Simley, which is just out of matruh, and it was there we met the New Zealand division coming up. The New Zealand division at that stage had been in Syria on rest period. Rommel knew where they were, I know that. And he estimated that it would take 5 days for them to come from Aleppo up in Syria, in Lebanon, 5 days for them to get back to have any effect on his advance. Now, they actually did it in 4 days. We met them just out of matruh, and the Germans at that stage were at Charing Cross, or Mersa, as we called it. But that night, they actually encircled the New Zealand division at Marquam. At that stage, I would have said the Germans were capable of wiping the New Zealand division completely out. However, instead of waiting till the following day when the German attack would certainly come, General Freiberg decided to have a go, to break out. And I know that they broke out mainly, they were actually a little short of ammunition, I believe, at that stage. And they broke out with a bayonet. Now, the New Zealand press did publish 2 or 3 years ago that the New Zealanders bayoneted doctors and nurses. Now, that could have been possible too, because in the desert, when you've got a moon, it's almost like day. It's very bright. But at night, it's very dark. Very, very dark. And there was no moon that night. And that was the big advantage that Freiburg had. And the New Zealand went through with the Maori Battalion, 28th Maori Battalion at the head of them, and they broke through the German lines. And actually, they retreated as far as El Adam, where special defences had been prepared. Now, that was the last line of defence. If we'd have lost El Adam, I don't know what the results would be. The Germans would have managed their pincer movement through Egypt and down through Russia to meet.
Okay. During the retreat, were you involved, since you had a train, did you help carry other units back at the same time?
I can't quite hear what you said there.
During the retreat, did you, since you were in the trains, did you participate in bringing the other units back towards Alamein?
At Alamein, we were bringing the necessary equipment, foodstuffs, ammunition, guns, trucks, anything at all. We were bringing it to Alamein. We were right into the Alamein station. And as a matter of fact, I was there when the big bombardment broke out. There was just 3 to 4 days when 925 pounders started their barrage. They fired for 3 days and 3 nights almost continuously. The roar was terrific, and the place at night was lit up like day with a flash from the guns. And although I wasn't in an infantry, I wasn't in a tank or with the artillery. I was actually right there in the station.
Okay. And where did you usually sleep at the time?
Where did we watch?
Did you sleep?
Well, you'd sleep anywhere.
Okay.
In many cases, you dig yourself a hole and sleep in that.
Okay. And what were your first impressions of the desert with the heat and all these kind of things?
The heat of the desert, it was anything from 120 and was the hottest, and well, it could be freezing cold at night.
And what about the wildlife? For example, were there problems with flies or snakes or I don't know what?
With which?
Flies, for example.
Oh, flies! You were never alone. The flies were absolutely terrible. Where there was dates growing, you'd swear there was beehives. That's how thick they were. The flies, everybody, you could always see the Egyptian wave, and that is the hand across the face. The Egyptian children, they face was always covered in flies around their eyes. They used some kind of a purple, I don't know what it was, but liquid they put around their eyes that did help to keep the flies from really infecting the eye. But the flies are terrible. It was a health hazard, and because I know that I suffered from diarrhea on about 3 occasions, and that was due to the flies and contaminating our food.
And was there anything you could do about the flies? Did you have any methods to protect yourself?
Do I have any which?
Any method to protect yourself from the flies?
No, your voice is very blurry as though something's...
Did you have any way to protect yourself from the flies? Any way to kill the flies?
Not really. We had plenty of disinfectant. We always had a corporal in charge of latrines and all this type of thing to try and combat the problem of flies. There was a lot of flies too around the dead. I remember at Alamein, in the early stages, we were actually having a South African bomb disposal, and not a bomb disposal, mine disposal crowd with us, and they were lifting mines that the Germans had left behind, and I just forgot my line of thought now. But the bodies, the German dead were always buried last, preferably, usually our own dead, apart from the fact that it was better to bury our own dead first. But the German dead were often left until the last because they were booby-trapped.
And this led to lots of flies? This led to lots of flies? The dead staying outside like that?
They were always terrific around where the dead were.
And were you ever involved in burying dead Germans?
Did I which?
Were you ever involved in burying dead Germans?
No.
Okay.
There were burial units.
Okay.
They took care of that.
You mentioned before the artillery at Alamein.
Yes.
Are there any other similar events in the desert that you witnessed? Any of the important events?
Well, apart from Alamein, we were camped. For a rest period, we were taken back, and we were camped near the Suez Canal. And I saw then something which I'd never saw it. I only saw it there, and I believe it was on the secret list. And that was an aeroplane that had a huge magnet, a big circle underneath it. Now what happened was that the Germans used to fly over and sprinkle mines, especially in the Suez Canal. And those mines were not the normal mine that's floated. They were a mine that sank to the bottom, because as you can realize, the Suez Canal was not that deep.
Yes.
And a ship passing over those mines would explode them. Now, they got one ship in the Suez Canal, the ENDN, they got her, but they had to dig the canal around her. Now, because they'd sprinkle these mines through, the British devised a bomber aircraft, and it had a big magnet right round the bottom of it. They used to fly that over the canal at around about 500 feet, I would say, at a certain speed. And they'd fly up and down in the morning. First thing in the morning, about between 5 and 6 o'clock in the morning, this aeroplane would fly up the canal and back and forth, and you could actually see the mines exploding behind us.
Okay. And you've never heard of this since?
I'd never saw it anywhere else. But I believe there's a friend of mine, I think I mentioned in an email that a friend of mine had done a DVD. Now, he saw the same plane off Libya somewhere. Okay.
And you mentioned before being machine gunned by the airplanes. What was it like when you were bombed by airplanes?
Well, I don't know how to explain this. Now, the most frightening aircraft was the German Stuka. And they used to come in, fly in waves, and they'd peel off individually, and they had screamers on the wings. And when they were diving, these screamers would sound, you could hear them, they'd drive you silly. And then they'd let the bombs go, and they would gracefully fly back up into the sky, but the screamers would stop, but the bomb then had a scream with it, and that continued till you heard a whoop when she hit the ground and exploded.
So these screamers were very stressful.
By which?
These screamers were very stressful for you.
Oh yes, they were very, very terrifying in a way.
And so the trains, it happened several times that they were attacked by Stuka aircraft?
It's getting an awful line.
I asked if the Stukas attacked the trains quite often, if that happened several times.
Oh, they used the Germans used Stukas extensively in the desert.
So what would you have to do in case of an attack like that? You also stopped the train and got out?
But mainly, the Stuka had a bomb. But mainly, they didn't seem to use Stukas for machine gunning, strafing us. They used the ME-109s.
Yeah, and if you saw a Stuka, did you also have to stop the train and get out of the train, just like for the ME-109s?
Oh yes, you'd leave the train. The train was still moving. You'd leave the train when a Stuka when a 109 attacked you. You had to. If you stayed in that cab, you're probably dead meat.
Yeah, okay. And And are there any other interesting things that happened that you can tell me about?
Well, it wasn't all doom and gloom. I think I've got to... Yes, I can tell you. Here's an interesting point. Because we backed the Australians in Syria. You realise that, did you?
Yes, yes.
We were actually operating a line from Haifa right through to Samak and right through the Yarmouk Valley, right through to Dua. And at times we went as far north as Damascus and as far south as Aqaba.
Okay.
We were never in that area. We were never bombed or machine gunned. The only time that we had anything that could be a bit of a problem was some of the Vichy French flew over us at Daraa and they dropped hand grenades. We had one chap, he got a little bit of shrapnel in his backside, but he didn't leave us. He was still they looked after him at Daraa. But we were at Daraa quite a while. Now, whilst there, I can tell you an interesting point. At McCarran, which is halfway in the Yarmouk Valley, I got up the engine, I pulled in there, and of course our own boys were at the station. I got off the aircraft, the engine, and I went across to the station. Standing in the doorway was an Arab Legion officer, a Jordanian. He was a Jordanian, I thought.
Okay.
And as I walked up to him, I looked at him as much as to say, "Come on, you Arab, get out of the road, I want to get it through me." And he said to me, he said, "Where do you come from, Kiwi? Pakuranga?" Now, Pakuranga is a suburb of Auckland.
Okay.
And I looked at him, I said, "You're a bloody Kiwi." He said, "Yeah." I said, "What are you doing in that deal suit?" He said, "Oh," I said, "I'm an officer in the Jordanian army." And we met them quite a lot around Samak or Palestine as we were there. So that was quite a matter of fact, a few days later, they rode into our camp at Samak to see if we had any beer.
Okay.
And there was an English officer, a New Zealand officer, and an Australian officer, all in the Jordanian army. We couldn't get rid of them for about 3 days.
And what were they doing in the Jordanian army?
What were we doing where?
What were they doing in the Jordanian army? How did they end up in the Jordanian army?
I wasn't in the Jordanian army.
No. How did these officers, why were they in the army, in the Jordanian army?
They were actually, they weren't actively involved in the Syrian side of it, but they were actually protecting Jordan. They were very active. They were always on the move, guarding the borders, and in Jordan.
Okay.
And we met them because we were in Jordanian territory.
Okay. And would you have any interesting stories about Tobruk?
Well, I haven't given much thought of that.
That's where the railroad line ended, at Tobruk, yeah?
We had quite a bit to do with the LRDG. I saw them on quite a number of occasions. The Long Range Desert Group. They were actually not part of a division. They were a specialised unit. And they went anything up to several thousand miles behind German and Italian lines, blowing up depots, attacking aerodromes, and then they just vanished into the desert. And their actual base was at Siwa. But they were not. I don't think they were involved in Alamein itself.
And why did you see them regularly? You said you saw them quite a few times. Why is that? You said you met the people of the Long Range Desert Group.
Yeah, well, the first time I met the LRDG was in Mahdi Camp. I was in Mahdi Camp, and we were in the artillery canteen having a few beers. And there was a whole swag. I just arrived in Egypt. There was a whole swag of these chaps in Arab dress. Completely in Arab dress. And I said to one of the first echelon boys who I was having a drink with, I said, what the hell are these Arabs around here? And he put his hands to his lips and said, shush. I said, what do you mean? He said, these are the LRG boys. They've just come back from a expedition behind German lines, behind Italian lines at that stage. And he said they've just come in and they're having a beer and they haven't changed. And they were still in their Arab uniform, more or less.
Okay.
The headdress was the same as the Arab headdress, and they wore a gabari over the uniform.
Okay. And you met them again after that, a few times?
Oh, a few times we ran across them. As a matter of fact, I was on leave in Cairo, and there was about 5 of us all together, and one of the boys in our unit, his brother was in the LRDG, so he came on leave with us. And I've never met such a wild sort of fellow in my life. I thought I'd end up with the Egyptian police, because when we got into a gharry, that's a horse and, you know what a gharry is, do you?
No.
It's like a taxi drawn by horses.
Okay.
And we all climbed into this, but he wasn't the LRDG chap. Wasn't content to get in the galley. He got up on the driver's seat. He took the reins off the driver. He took his whip off him, and he was driving his horses through Cairo with a breakneck speed, galloping the horses through Cairo streets. And anybody that screamed at him, he cracked the whip at them. But this is the type of man they were. They were really outstanding fellows that loved excitement.
Okay.
They were mainly, the LRDG was more New Zealanders than any other nationality.
Okay. And do you have any other stories to tell about Egypt?
Yes. Let's see. another amusing incident, really. I've got one of here written down. I've got here, our train was heading towards Kapuza when air raid red was advised from Assad. We could see that the Kapuza was really copying it. The train following was brought into the siding, and the third train was sitting at the points and waiting clearance to enter. Evidently one German bomber, a Henkel, having dropped his load on Kapuza, decided to follow the line and machine gun anything it saw. The crew of 3 trains, which were 9 men, plus station staff of 6 men, were standing in front of the station talking when the sound of the bomber reached us. One said that it was a Henkel. Someone thought it was a Whippy. That's a British bomber. The next thing, the plane was flying at no more than 50 feet high. A crew in the cockpit we could see as plainly as you could almost touch them. And they came with guns blazing. Everyone dropped to the ground or attempted to dig the sand out of the hollows of the terrain. As fast as one displaced the sand, someone filled it up for you. As the plane passed over, the rear gun opened up to add to the confusion. There was actually nobody hurt at that occasion.
Okay. You said you have your stories written down, some of them.
Yes, I've written down quite a few little stories like this. And I can easily send them to you as soon as I get okay with the computer. I'm not very good with the
computer. Tell you right from the outset that I was not directly involved in the Battle of El Alamein. I served with the British First Army in the Torch landings, which went in Algeria and